It's good because then you can represent the chilly people and I represent the warm people.
Yeah, we can do that, but there are people worse off, you know. There are people in the country still getting snow right now.
Yeah,
so.
no kidding. Well, and then in a few months, you're going to be enjoying summer, and you're going to be making fun of me because you know what the 120 degrees is like out here, and I'm going to be pretending like it's no big deal. Oh, it's nothing.
It's actually not, though. You're a champ. You got used to it pretty fast.
Yeah.
I mean, once it's hot, it's hot. Doesn't matter if it's 110 or 120. It's the same.
Yeah. I mean, you're just trapped inside, and that gets annoying. But,
that's right.
But cool. So it was actually a pretty busy week when it comes to UFO news, surprisingly. It's always funny to look back, and you feel like there isn't much, but there was a lot. And there were a lot of stories I wanted to write that I couldn't even get to, so I might write one or two today, or at least in the next couple days. So keeping busy. UFO news is keeping us busy. But first, let me tell you about our guest tonight. I'm really excited for this because I haven't, our guest is Jeremy Corbell. He runs a website called Extraordinary Beliefs. He's an investigative filmmaker, he calls himself, because he does these documentaries. But he does more than that. Like some of his documentary type of stuff is kind of almost artsy, but it's great. I love it. It's his voice, and he's sharing his perspective on things a lot of the time. But I really like the way he does it. It makes it feel real kind of – it's edgy, no doubt, because I think as Jason and I talked about, he used a little bit – I think one bad word in his lecture at the IUFOC recently, and that caused a little bit of controversy, at least with one lady, huh?
Yeah, probably only one lady. But,
yeah, probably only one lady.
Yeah, it is a little different at UFO conferences to number one have a speaker who is younger than the age of 50, and then also have a speaker who's using profanity on stage.
Yeah.
Getting pumped up.
Yeah, getting excited. So, and I'm surprised some of the others don't, though, too, because we've hung out with a lot of these people, and there's foul language, of course, like in any gathering, being peppered throughout conversations.
Oh yeah, it certainly flies. And we're talking about people who, some of these people get extremely passionate about what they're talking. So yeah, it is surprising that it doesn't happen more often.
But Jeremy's a really cool guy. His documentaries are great. If you were at the Congress, you were able to see a couple of them. You can see trailers online right now for some of his documentaries, and I think you might be able to watch like one. But he's got a lot more work he's working on that's really exciting, and we'll talk about it. And we'll talk about people's frustrations with him not getting his work out more quickly, and he explains why that is the case. But it's really cool. He's been a good friend of ours at Open Minds for a couple of years now, and we were really excited to have him at the conference because we got to kind of introduce him and his work. For instance, one of his documentaries, Patient 17, was not seen anywhere before or since because he's still working on a final version, but it was a great documentary about Roger Lear, and you should watch the trailer because it's got some really cool stuff. But, really interesting guy. He's since become friends with George Knapp and Bob Lazar as well, so we'll talk about that. But that's one of the reasons we grouped those three together on our Saturday afternoon. So if you haven't gotten his talk yet, you should check those out. By the way, I will mention we do have Bob Lazar's video up on our video portal streaming, so you could go watch that. I know people in other countries were having difficulty, getting the DVD. It can kind of be expensive. So just for a few bucks, you can go watch that at our video portal. Just go to openminds.tv and you'll see a few banners, including one in the upper right hand of the page where you'll be able to look at that. And then we're going to have the George Knapp one up very soon, I think in the next couple days here as well, because those really go together. George Knapp explaining what's going on, and then Bob Lazar, Q&A going on there. So really cool interview. And you were the first one with Open Minds, Jason, I think, to start talking with Jeremy.
I don't remember now that it was so long ago.
Wasn't it Silver
it's
Surfer?
Probably right, because we did the Silver Surfer story, and I got in touch with him, and he actually provided us with the video and the follow-up details to his investigation. So I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. That was a UFO video that got a lot of news, and it was dubbed the Silver Surfer because I think he described it, because it kind of curved through the sky, and it wasn't too long after I think that movie came out. But was he the one who first discovered it was actually the Red Bull guys, or did you find that out?
He certainly did. He kept digging and wanted to find answers, and he found other people who had seen it too, and he discovered the identity of his own UFO.
And there's even like a famous basketball player whose name I remember was difficult to pronounce, who took video as well.
Yeah, I don't remember who the basketball player was, but you're right. And the NBC station in LA contacted us and to fill them in about the details, because everybody was still, even though Jeremy had come forward and said, "Look, I found out what it is," people were still thinking it was this unidentified thing. And he even joked about it in his lecture, I think, about how, that's how he got into this whole thing, by recording a UFO and then debunking his own UFO sighting.
Yeah, pretty cool. So, real neat guy, but it just shows you that he's definitely a guy who's in search for the truth, as opposed to just kind of bolstering up, things that get popular, but because that happens sometimes. Something gets in the news until the witness really backs that it's something extraordinary, because they're excited about the news, I think, that's going on, and the support that they receive, and then are less open to some of the more prosaic answers that arise.
That's a good segue to talk about the news.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about the news out there. So a lot of UFO news to talk about. Jason, do you want to start it off?
I would love to start off, and I want to talk about a story that certainly made some buzz last week, and that is the story about Japan's defense minister saying that UFOs haven't invaded Japan. What? Mm-hmm. So this came about at a upper house budget committee meeting was taking place, and somebody asked the defense minister, Jen Nakatani, if, alien spacecraft, if they'd have ever scrambled jets to intercept alien spacecraft. And he explained their procedure, saying that the Air Self-Defense Force, they detect any unidentified flying objects that violate the country's airspace, they scramble the fighter jets, if necessary, and make visual observations. And he says that sometimes they find that those objects are flying birds or flying objects other than aircraft, but he doesn't know of a case finding an unidentified flying object believed to have come from anywhere other than Earth. So this is an interesting statement by him. Of course, Japan is a country filled with UFO sighting reports throughout history, and our colleague Antonio Huneeus even wrote a lot of interesting things coming out of Japan, including the who was it? It was the former prime minister's wife who had gone on record and even put her account in a book about an experience she had aboard a UFO, saying that while my body was sleeping, I think my spirit flew on a triangle-shaped UFO to Venus. And other people in Parliament and even a former defense minister have gone on record talking about UFOs there. In 2007, I think it was, the former defense minister then said that there are no grounds for us to deny there are unidentified flying objects and some life form that control them. Few discussions have been held on what the legal grounds are for a military response. And even a parliament member, like I alluded to, said that I believe it's an urgent task to collect information and confirm the existence of UFOs from the viewpoint of our national security. So this is something that's been discussed at high levels in Japan. And so it's interesting now to see the most recent comment from the defense minister saying that, no, UFOs haven't invaded us. We don't have any records, or at least he said, to my knowledge, I don't know, that we scrambled our jets to intercept or investigate potentially extraterrestrial UFO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this will kind of segue into the story I want to bring up, and I'm sure some people may believe we're being a bit naive in this, but to me this demonstrates, at the very least, That there are, just like here, there are people in their government, some who believe there is something to the phenomena and some who don't, which I think is interesting. But I don't know. I'm sure others will read in some sort of conspiracy here.
There's always room for conspiracy, my friend.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess it's possible he knows more and he's just lying, essentially. But it's also entirely possible he doesn't know more and he's just saying, I don't really think there's much to it, whereas in the past other officials feel there is.
Right. You know, just because somebody takes an office doesn't mean all of a sudden their brain gets plugged into a supercomputer and they go, here's everything we've ever encountered.
Yeah, exactly like the Matrix. Yeah. And they all of a sudden know.
That's what the guy said. He said, you know, to my knowledge, we haven't had to do this.
Mm-hmm. I really like that little noise you can make. I can't do that.
Well, that's because I have experience having my brain plugged into computers.
Yeah, I have to do the tongue blah, 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 blah thing, which doesn't sound even very digital or electronic like you did. But back to the topic at hand. One of these stories, including, I think it was the one that was the president's wife when she came out, made it into the WikiLeaks. So we've got a story on all the UFO WikiLeaks, because there were some UFO stories in the WikiLeaks, but there were no major revelations like some people thought and some people claimed there were. But, yeah, one of those UFO WikiLeaks was about Japan and some of their statements. Remember that?
Yep, lots of interesting statements there and plenty to pull from too. So people wanting to read between the lines, there's a lot of things that could be pulled from there. But definitely shows a lot of people in high positions there interested in extraterrestrial UFOs.
Right. Including
there are everywhere, Alejandro.
Yeah, including the United States, where some presidents have been interested in the topic. And Jimmy Kimmel is trying to find out who. So we talked about how Jimmy Kimmel had asked President Clinton about UFOs and then President Obama about UFOs. And when after the Clinton segment had aired, Ben Hansen, the former host of Sci-Fi's Fact or Fake Paranormal Files, did an analysis. He has some FBI background, but he acknowledges he's not a body language expert, but he has witnessed thousands of interviews, and he's worked with body language experts, so he took a stab at doing an analysis of the body language of Clinton. He felt that Clinton was somewhat nervous and seemed to know more than he wanted to share. He's done this now with Obama. And it's kind of funny because the day that Kimmel questioned Obama, Kimmel had told, like, the LA Weekly, I think it was, that I think I'm going to ask Obama about UFOs. And they wrote in their story, if he does, he'll probably be analyzed, just like Ben Hansen did to President Clinton. And they embedded the video, and so they mentioned Ben Hansen. And it seems like Kimmel might have known this because he says to the president, when he asks about UFOs, you know, everything you say here, all your movements, everything are going to be analyzed. And they were. So Ben did his analysis. And he says, for the most part, everything seems pretty, he thinks that there is a little bit of perhaps apprehension or nervousness in Obama, but he thinks he's probably genuinely joking. He says he thinks Obama's an honest person, and was throughout, and he says this due to his analysis. But he also says one statement, though, that Obama made, there was a change in his demeanor, and the analysis of the details of this change led Hansen to believe that he answered this one singular question honestly and accurately, and that was that I can't reveal anything. And so he thinks that Obama must know more, and he really can't, reveal anything. It's a very interesting analysis. Prior to watching this analysis, I thought 100% watching the video, they were joking the entire time. But Ben has really made me think, and now I'm only maybe 90% certain that they were joking the whole time. Because you watch the video and you see it in context, and you can analyze frame by frame, but this stuff happens really quickly. What did you think? Did you watch the analysis? Or
I did watch the analysis, and it's a very inaccurate science. there's lots of guessing and just generalizations made about body language and movements, and because everybody communicates differently. Mm-hmm. And there are also added stress situation of being on TV and being the president and needing to think through what you say because you know that you have to say things a certain way because they're going to be interpreted all sorts of different ways. Here's my take on Ben's comment about how his statement reveals that, he might be withholding information. He might not be able to say anything more because he doesn't know anymore. That could also make sense. But we don't know. I'm glad he did the analysis. And I wonder if he did the analysis because he felt bullied into it, because Kimmel called him out. Did you ask him about that?
No, I didn't ask him about that.
Oh,
but
darn it. I don't have time to do this, but now I have to because on national TV he said I was going to.
I don't think so, because like the next morning or even right after the show aired, I got an email from Ben, and he seemed really excited. He was like, this is going to take a while, but I'm going to get on this as soon as possible, and I'm going to do an analysis of this. So he seemed really excited, and he was going to jump on it really quickly. And he did relatively quickly. It came out maybe a week later, which, if you watch this thing, it's 40 minutes. Ben is very careful. I can see why he felt it needed to be 40 minutes, because he qualifies and explains everything he's talking about, which makes the video very compelling. And he makes a great case that there was a slight demeanor change. I think that demeanor change could have been kind of a rolling of the eyes type of thing too, though, where he's like, okay, you're going to keep on this line of questioning, whatever. And then I think he's like, okay, well, I got a couple more good jokes I could throw out, and because he's definitely a jokester, no doubt. I think, Ben makes the point that no president has answered the questions like this, but no president has been as much of a jokester as Obama has, I don't think. He really likes to tell jokes, and I loved he was so funny, but who knows? It opens me to the idea, but like you said, he can't reveal anything because he doesn't know anything. Could be the reason why, or he could have been just purely joking, feigning like there is secrets in order for the comic, significance just for a laugh. And if there is something to be known, I just think it would be a bad idea to tell any politician any deep secrets, because politicians aren't the best people to give secrets to. That would be unwise.
Well, and look, I mean, even if he did say, yeah, I do know, and here's what I know.
Yeah.
Look, we have the same people here saying that the government is covering things up and we can't trust anything they say. Well, the president comes out and says, this is what I know. Then I guess you still have to take that same position and say, oh, he's feeding us disinformation. We can't trust what he's saying. He's part of the government. You can't win.
Yeah, exactly. You can't win. That's a really good point, too. This is interesting, though. Speaking of governments and government secrets, I think that this is fascinating, personally, and it's such a mystery. It's one of the reasons that I felt that John Burroughs, one of the Rendlesham Forest witnesses, really deserves the Researcher of the Year award at our conference, which he got, because he's keeping an eye on this case that is so interesting. He's gotten such a runaround when it's come to the FOIA requests that he's made to get more files from the U.S. government and the UK government about the Rendlesham Forest. He submitted a FOIA to the UK government, which made the UK government say, oh, I know we told you guys we released all of the UFO files, but we just happened to find 18 more. This was in December. They told him that we're going to then take these, December 2013. They said, we're going to take these files, we're going to transfer them to the National Archives, and then it's going to take them about maybe 9 months to process them before they can get out to the public. Well, that period of time passed, and then the MOD said, oh, well, we haven't transferred them yet. We're still going to do that. It's going to take 9 months. And here we are again, now, interesting enough, a lord One of the guys from the House of Lords. The House of Lords is really weird too. I mean, the House of Lords is a branch of the government, kind of like, we have the House and the Senate as our government. Think if we had one more group who had the power to change bills and to look over bills. However, these are just the richy rich people. That's the House of Lords. They've got hundreds and hundreds of members, but these are people that the government or the Queen herself, the royals, have knighted as a lord, and that then gets you a seat in the government where you can, ask questions and change bills and things like this. So that's what.
And choke people with your evil powers.
Oh no, they can't. That's
Lord Vader.
Wars.
He totally does.
Yeah, he's not in the UK House of Lords.
No? Okay.
No, I don't think they can do that. I'm pretty sure they can't.
Sorry, I was confused.
Yeah, in fact, so they do have pub brawls and stuff, but I don't think they have the type of violence like that they can do.
That'd be great, and all their wigs would be flying everywhere.
Yeah, that would be cool. So, weird branch of government. Anyway, one of these guys in the House of Lords, his name is Lord Black of Brentwood. He's actually in charge of some major media organizations, so he's a rich guy in the media. He actually went, and we're not sure why. I even asked Burroughs if he knew why, but he asked a question. Essentially, he asked to the government formally, where are these files and why haven't they been released? To which, about a week later, they got an official response from the representative of the MOD in the House of Lords. His name is Lord Astor of Hever. And this guy essentially said, well, we have these files. We haven't sent them over to the National Archives yet. That should be soon. Once the National Archives gets them, it's going to take them 9 to 12 months. So they're saying the same thing over and over again, that we haven't given them to the National Archives yet, but we're going to. But once they get them, it's still going to take 9 to 12 months. And we're in March of 2015 now. And they originally told Burroughs they would do this in now we're in March of 2015 yet, and they originally told Burroughs they were going to do this in December 2013. So this is getting really weird. Why the hell aren't they passing these files over? I mean, this really smacks of some sort of conspiracy, which is what Nick Pope told, I think, the Mirror, who covered this, a UK paper. What the hell's going on, Jason?
I'll tell you exactly what's going on.
Okay.
This is a perfect demonstration of why governments around the world should not lie about UFOs. Because they're just digging a hole, Alejandro.
Mm-hmm.
And once you dig that hole, oh man, you're just creating this giant problem that you're always going to have to try to keep up with. And sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you. And that's what's happening in this case. These guys lied, and it's catching up with them.
So you think that there's going to be some evidence of some lies in these papers?
Yeah.
Well, there have been in the past.
No, I don't, because I don't think those papers are actually going to get out. Of course not, Alejandro. They've got to figure out how to clean it up and release what they want to release. But they got caught with their pants down.
You think
and that's not always a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's not. I've caught you with your pants down, and it was terrible. It was so frightening.
Well, I don't remember that ever happening, so it must have been terrible.
It didn't. I'm spreading some disinformation about you with your pants down. I'm sure if I did, it would be a lovely experience.
All right.
Moving on.
Yes, move on.
But yeah, I mean, this is really just crazy. This is getting really crazy. And that's why I think it's great that Burroughs exposed this whole thing, because this is not, this isn't good. I mean, this is some either incredible ineptitude, like I wrote in the story, or there's really something they're hiding. And it seems like the latter more and more as time goes on.
It's a fascinating story. For nothing else, I mean, if you're sick and tired of hearing about the Rendlesham Forest incident, that's fine. I get it.
Yeah.
All get kind of a little worn out from the same old story. But this is what makes it interesting. The whole drama that keeps going on with these files and just how the government has been reacting to it. And good for Burroughs for keeping on them and making this thing still have legs. I mean, it's still an evolving story, and I hope we find out more.
Yeah, and we've got to wait for how long now? Maybe another year to get these files? This is getting ridiculous. This is really wild.
We're on their timetable.
Yeah.
They're not keeping their schedule, so when and if they come out, that'll be great.
Yep. And finally, I just want to mention a UK story that's had a lot of legs, and it's kind of interesting because it has gotten a lot of social media attention, and we're getting responses from witnesses on our story that we posted. But there was a sighting March 24th in Cannock Chase. This blogger or author about paranormal, Lee Brickley, witnessed them himself. He lives in this area and blogged about it on his paranormal Facebook and website. And he got a lot of responses from other witnesses. There are a lot of people who suspect those are jet fighters that were actually seen. He even admitted that that's possible, if not probable. But we've gotten more witnesses even who have posted on our story saying those weren't jet fighters. That was something weird. They heard loud noises and saw some lights fly over town. So interesting story that I think people should check out. And, of course, we have a lot of other UFO stories from Roger Marsh and MUFON on the website.
Like you said, it was a busy week for news. And, it was also the stories making rounds now about UFO sighting statistics from the National UFO Reporting Center, and that's just kind of exploded in the news. And I wonder if that's because we've had so many weeks of kind of slow UFO news. I mean, the media is hungry for this type of stuff.
That's a really good point, because we did go through kind of a dry spell there, and all of a sudden we've got a lot of UFO news. And, yeah, this site that did these UFO maps, the stories all over the place because people are looking at their local area. One note I'll make on those, though, and we haven't even written about any of these yet, but Lee Spiegel did for the Huffington Post today. But they are using New Fork data, and I've noticed because Peter Davenport, he's actually like it's just interesting because he doesn't have as many sightings reported to him as MUFON has had, which is a larger organization. And I think that MUFON, you get more of a representation from all over the country as opposed to the New Fork data. Not to say anything bad about, the National UFO Reporting Center, which ran by Peter Davenport. It's just a one-man show, and he does an awesome job. I mean, for one person, it's amazing. But I think it would have been better if they would have used both sources of information. But you're right, that story's really blown up.
And I've always wondered if, the real value, not the real value, I mean, everything he does has value. I mean, the National UFO Reporting Center is awesome. But, they are one of the named organizations that the FAA refers UFO reports to.
Good point, yeah.
So his data might have more of the, FAA-sourced sighting reports, which is something interesting to consider.
Yeah, good point. And I tell people report to both places if you're going to report.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else you wanted to mention there, buddy?
No, sir. I just want to state for the record that my pants are up, and they usually are up.
Good. Let's keep it that way, young man.
Yes.
No inappropriateness.
Well, some is good, but not today.
Good. All right. Well, then, thank you, Jason, for both your addition regarding UFO news stories and for the information regarding your pants. However, why don't we move on and speak with Jeremy Corbell? I am very happy to be joined by Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell. Did I say all those names correctly?
Yeah, Jeremy Corbell. That's good.
You have a lot of names, though. I do see I often see Jeremy Corbell, but sometimes I see the Kenyon Lockyer in there too.
Yeah, it's like 4 whole names. But the reason for that is really because of my jiu-jitsu career. If you search my name, Jeremy Corbell, you get tons of jiu-jitsu stuff. And that was the life that I lived before. That was just, a lot of what, that was my whole life. And so it kind of helps distinguish when people are searching for UFO stuff and not martial arts stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that because, I feel that, and I talked about you a lot when we were ramping up for the conference, because I told people about how excited I was that you were going to be speaking. Afterwards, too, I think we talked about you, too. And how we felt it would be kind of like an introduction of you to this field, all of which I think went off stellar. It went off great, and so excited about it. And so I want to kind of talk about, to introduce you further to at least our audience, since it's the first time you've been on the podcast, kind of what your background was, what this other world was.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's fairly simple. I grew up doing jiu-jitsu from when I was, 9 years old. That was my life. That's what I dedicated my life to. As a young kid, I just had tons of energy and not a lot of places to put it. So jiu-jitsu was kind of an outlet for me. And the mindset, the warrior training, the warrior mentality was what really helped define me as a human, as an individual growing up. And so I dedicated my life to it. I mean, it really turned me around, really helped me to focus my life and my energy. So I ended up, teaching from, the age of 17 onward. And that's all that I thought I would ever do. As far as how it relates to UFOs, separately and independently, when I was 13 years old, my imagination was weaponized and my curiosity was weaponized by the story that I heard, from George Knapp and Bob Lazar and John Lear and Gene Huff. So that's how I kind of got into ufology, is just, pure curiosity. But my livelihood and what I did for a living was train jiu-jitsu for all those years until a big shift happened.
Mm-hmm. Do you still do that?
Begrudgingly, once in a while, I'll do jiu-jitsu, but it's painful, man. I like not getting punched in the face for a living.
I hear ya. So now you're an investigative filmmaker. Is that your full time?
Yeah, I mean, it is full time. I mean, currently what I do in Los Angeles is I also manage apartments that I have. But yeah, this is, filmmaking is what takes up 90% of my time. Mm-hmm. And, what I basically tried to do was use the camera as an opportunity, to meet people. I mean, it really was a passport into all the things that I was curious about, having a film camera and being able to, in a sensitive and unique way, edit and film and this sort of thing. It really was a passport into the unknown. And so I've dedicated the last 6 years of my life to my investigative filmmaking work, and I've just started to put some of that footage out. As you know, I premiered a couple films at your festival.
Mm-hmm. So did you have any sort of formal training in journalism or filmmaking?
No, not at all. Actually, I was the subject of a documentary film about my artwork. What happened was, essentially, I was doing jiu-jitsu and running these trips and traveling the world. Really, it got me all around the world. And then I got a respiratory illness called valley fever, and that put me out for a year. And, every concept of what it was of who I was and what I was going to do and my identity and how intertwined it was with the things that I did in life, being a martial athlete, that all kind of shattered. I mean, when you can't physically do what you've done your whole life, it is a traumatic ego disintegration. You realize that you've identified yourself with something that you are not. These things that we do are reflections of who we are. Who we are is much bigger. What inspires us is much bigger than the things that we do. Those are reflections of who we are. And so what happened to me was I realized, wow, I am not just what I do, that there is something greater inside of me that was like calling to do something. So I started making artwork, and that took off for me. In the first few years, I was a mixed media artist doing these art shows. There was a few people that were filming me. And this one guy in particular was making a documentary film on my work. And as he was filming me, I realized, what am I doing? The artwork I'm doing is two-dimensional compared to film. With film, you can tell stories. You can go so much deeper. There's a dialogue that happens in documentary film that's back and forth. you can learn things that have impact on the world. So an example of that would be, this HBO documentary that recently came out called The Jinx.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the serial murderer guy.
Durst.
Anyway, Robert Durst. I mean, the making of the documentary, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but it had impact in the real world. So what they uncovered in the documentary process had real world implication. So I guess that's kind of the hope that I have, is not to just point my camera up to the skies into the unknown and maybe catch some lights, but is to talk with the individuals who are in this field, who are doing the research, who are actually the experiencers, people who are integral to this whole experience that we have, and asking them questions. And so that's kind of what I've focused on. And I have no formal training. My best credential is my ability.
Mm-hmm. Which speaks volumes. That's why, I'm not afraid to ask you this question, because, even if your answer was, well, what it was, which is I have no formal background, I mean, the work speaks for itself, because I am like a huge fan of every single video you post. I just love them to death. I just think they're so wonderful. So you're definitely very, very talented with filmmaking, that's for sure.
Thanks, man. Why? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's all the same. Look, it's, the amount of attention to detail that you put into anything. Do you want the short answer or do you want the real answer? And that's kind of like with jiu-jitsu. There are no shortcuts, right? Mm-hmm. So same thing with filmmaking like this. You can't just make stuff up, or else you're doing a different kind of filmmaking. Mm-hmm. So the idea with documentary filmmaking is that the obsessive kind of precision-based, process. That's what's so exciting. If you focus in and just, don't cut corners, you're going to get a great film.
Mm-hmm. Did you immediately then, when you got into filmmaking, go straight to UFOs?
Oh, wow. Yes, I did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yes, I did. You know what it was it was my first thing I ever filmed was I went finally to go see John Lear. John Lear is the nexus. He's kind of the epicenter. I like to say all roads lead from Lear, because he was my starting point, really. I mean, I would not be interested in this if it wasn't for John Lear. We recently had it out for one another. He got real pissed at me because he basically said, well, you don't believe all the things that I say. And I said, no, I don't. That is not what I'm here to do. The thing about John, though, he may say a lot of things I don't agree with, but it is certain things that he has exposed to me that I have been able to verify that have been just totally wild, that show me that John Lear, no one should write him off. Mm-hmm. The things he has to say, even if you don't agree with them, he's come to those conclusions on his own terms, and you should come to your conclusions on your own terms. So that's the first thing I ever did was go to John. And he finally let me in after like 3 years of trying to talk with the guy. And he wouldn't let me film that night. And I didn't really know what I was doing with the camera, to be honest with you. But I went out onto the strip, and that was my first short film, was that first night I ever really filmed with my camera. That's my short film, Las Vegas.
That's your first short?
That is literally the first time I ever filmed for more than like 2 minutes. That was the first time I ever filmed.
Well, it seems like that was very impromptu, and I think you even say that in the description.
Yeah.
And but it's so fun. I love it. It's great. And the footage you got of, these people grinding or whatever, I mean, the feel is so Las Vegas. I'm a huge Vegas fan, mm-hmm. Even though, I'm not, which is funny because I'm not a drinker or a gambler, but I just love the life and the vibe and kind of just, kind of that, kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of just not just gluttony, but that certainly as well, but just the...
Yeah, well, there's a livelihood to it. There's a reality. There's a rawness, and you see that, and that was actually a very huge learning lesson for me. The Las Vegas, the film. Actually, there is mention of UFOs in the film Las Vegas, which is so interesting.
Oh, that's right.
There is. But what was so cool about that was I realized I'm walking down the strip and it really felt like everything just dropped into place. I mean, people would literally kind of stand out and kind of jump out in front of the camera and want to tell me their story. And as you know, you've seen the film, the stories are not shallow. The stories are incredibly deep.
Well, and they never are. And that's what's wonderful about the film. And like you said, you're just trying, I mean, when somebody's telling you their story when it comes to their life, they all entail so many different dimensions. Mm-hmm. I mean, as humans, we just all are much more complicated than the simple stories that are written in fiction.
Absolutely. And I think that, a question is worth 1,000 answers. Like if you ask the right question, I mean, truly it is a weapon, your ability to ask a question. You ask the right question, you're going to get some incredible answers. And that's the thing that I've learned a lot speaking with people in the UFO field, is that everybody in this field, whether you like them or you don't, the one thing about everybody in this field is there is a sense of curiosity and wonder. People want to know. They want to know what's underneath. They want to know what's behind, and they want to know what's around. People in this field are curious. I actually had a really powerful experience in talking at your convention, because what I was exposed to was a number of people who had come to the convention because they were looking for answers. These are not researchers. These are people who have seen something because they live in Phoenix and it's a famous place for like the Phoenix Lights and that sort of thing. And they literally heard about your convention on the news. And they made their way there. And I met a number of people like this, and they were coming to get answers. And I thought that was so fascinating.
It is. What's really fascinating, too, and I'm sure you can relate to this, especially seeing your work, is they get frustrated when they come and they get information but often feel like they don't get answers. And that's because nobody really has all the answers, I think.
Right. There's that idea that truth is perceived or seen in fragments and from different angles of vision, right? So you can have one thing that is true. We're all seeing a different side or a different version of it. I guess it's like kind of like that blue, black, gold, white dress thing that that came out recently. It's like we can all look at one thing, but we all see it so dynamically differently. And it's just that's just the nature of it. And then what I learned is that there's a surface level that people I've never seen anything like the mothership. I mean, that would be so cool, and I'm open to it. Show me, right? But I've talked to a lot of people that have had experiences that were that profound. And what I've noticed is that oftentimes people that experience this, and I don't know about you, Alejandro, if you've ever experienced anything like that, but what I've noticed is that people will start to describe it, and they'll describe it to you in the terms that they know you're going to understand it, but they leave a lot out. And if you start asking a few more questions, you'll realize that it's often just stranger than our minds can compute. I mean, this phenomenon is so bizarre. It's not as straightforward as, extraterrestrial crafts traveling from another star. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a bizarre phenomenon.
Agreed. I mean, I kind of say that constantly, and that's why I think a lot of these researchers like Jacques Vallée or Hynek or something like that come to this point where they're like, this phenomenon is too enigmatic for me just to say it's extraterrestrials. It's much more complicated, and I agree with that. It's a bizarre, I think maybe even enigmatic for enigmatic's sake.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder. I mean, people have often said there's a trickster element to this. I mean, George Knapp, has often said that because of his experiences with studying and documenting the Skinwalker Ranch. And, I will have to agree, like, for an example, I don't want to speak too much in generalities. I want to give you, like, here's an example of something that is totally bizarre. And I just learned about it. There's this case in Finland or something like that, and these two sisters wake up, and it's like they heard this voice, come out, you have to look. So they got up out of bed, and they're looking out one of their windows, and they see this, object that's essentially hovering, but these beings, they allege, come out. And they said it was like as if you fast forward a cassette tape. The beings were moving in like a temporal reality separate from hers and her sisters. And then the weirdest thing they said was that when they'd step and look out a different window onto the same lawn where this object is, in one window pane they can see this object, and in the other they can't. And it's like, that is the weirdest thing to make up. If you're going to make up a weird story or a weird detail, that's a discrediting kind of fact, because that makes we have no frame of reference for that. So they're talking about temporal distortion, time distortion, as well as some sort of, physical location distortion where they can't even see the event simply looking through a different window frame. So it's these kinds of things that are just so asymmetrical. They don't make sense, yet these are the reports when you really get into them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how interesting. So getting back to John Lear, now John Lear, you said, is kind of where you started, even before Las Vegas. I mean, you've been working on this John Lear stuff, and I don't think you've got maybe like a trailer out there, but you still haven't packaged and put that all together.
No, it's very complex. And so, here's the deal. Everybody's trying to tell me, hey, put something out. And, I get people mad at me online. And, I serve nobody but my own interests when it comes to what I'm going to put out. But yeah, after all this time, all I have is a trailer to show people. Now, the amount of footage is staggering. I mean, my point was not to go there, learn his 6 conspiracy theories, and put them up in a 40-minute piece.
Right.
That was not the point. My point was to get to the truth, was to shake this down from the inside out. And who better to start with but the Godfather of conspiracy? I mean, John has been really like a guide for me. He has put me in all these different directions, some of which are something that I don't want to pursue, but a lot of which are astoundingly things I do want to pursue. So I guess the big question is, when are you going to see some of the Lear footage? And I think where I'm at now with that is that when I start editing this is not a single film. Mm-hmm. The epic saga of the Lear footage is going to have to be in a bunch of pieces. It's going to have to be in a series.
That's fun, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be more fun to watch because I'm not going to try to jam everything into like an hour and a half. It's going to be kind of unlimited, and I can release things bit by bit. So as of right now, the only thing, if you look hard enough, you can find, because I haven't officially released it, is the John Lear teaser, right, the trailer. But what you will see is a series of pieces that show you an intimate view into his life. I mean, John is a pioneer. I have so much respect for John. He's hard to get along with at times, but he is a really, really fascinating individual with a fascinating life story.
I was just going to say, I think that film's going to be called Immaculate Deception, or at least that's the title you've used. And we've talked a lot about John Lear. But we probably ought to tell people who the heck this guy is. So maybe if you could kind of tell people, who is this guy?
Yeah, I mean that's also a complex answer, but yeah. John Lear essentially is one of the most decorated aviation experts on the planet. So John Lear is the son of William P. Lear, who is the inventor of obviously the Lear jet, the 8-track stereo, a whole bunch of other things. His father was a very dynamic individual, and John dedicated his life to being a pilot and had a number, I think 19 world speed records in the Lear jet. He had every FAA certificate in the history of the FAA. He flew flights for the CIA when it was back in the 70s, like Air America flights, that kind of thing. Little things people don't know about him. He was the youngest person ever to scale the Matterhorn at one time. It's just crazy things. And he crashed a plane when he was like 16, broke almost every bone in his body. The guy's been through a lot. So John that's who he was at that time. Then, out of nowhere, John's, taking these photos of like the stealth fighter sitting out at Area 51 when no one knew that base existed. And he went to, out in Vegas, there's a news outlet, there's a guy named Ned Day. Ned Day was George Knapp's mentor. And John gave Ned all this information about the stealth fighter, and Ned ran a story. FBI come along, shake down Ned, and they say, Ned, where did you get this information? This is classified stuff. Who's your leak? Who's your source? And Ned said, hey, look, if a little reporter in Las Vegas can find out some of the most important secrets in America, you better be sure the Russians can. So I did you a favor. I mean, they literally took Ned, put him under hot lights, and shook him down. So that's why John had a lot of credit in a way. People knew that he was a serious man. And Ned never let it out that John was his source. And that's a little known story. And then John comes in later with all this UFO stuff, and he throws it down on Ned's desk. And, Ned didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But sitting over in the other side of the room was a man named George Knapp, a fearless investigator. And he says, I'll take a look at it, John. And that's how that all started. I mean, wow. I think George will admit he would not be into this at all if it had not originally come from John Lear.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Great story. I never knew this.
Yeah, so that's how it started. And then, as you know, when John went on the record with George Knapp, it was a morning show that George says a lot of people didn't listen to. And after John went on and kind of what he believed about the UFO reality, that's when it all broke open. That's when this modern day kind of ufology that's when this happened. It was at that time. And we all got to credit John, for that. And then, of course, that's how George got to meet Bob Lazar.
Mm-hmm. So, John Lear, and this is what makes it hard, and this is why I know that you have a difficult time putting together this video, because often I've got the impression that he reads about stuff online, gets a lot of stuff online, and kind of just believes everything, and so he believes about all these people on or going to the moon or living on the moon and space projects and all of this really wild stuff. So it's really hard, I guess, in a way to put it, to separate the wheat from the chaff sort of thing.
Well, I would take a different stance on it, and I'm sure John would even take a different one. But the way I see it is not that John just believes everything. That's not where I'm coming from. You have to ask. You have to ask him about that. The way that I see it, I mean, although, Bob Lazar says that's the problem, Lear does not have a filter. That's what he has said publicly. It's more my experience that John has been exposed to and has seen evidence that maybe you or I have not seen. So, for example, over the years I've been filming with John, and again, I want to reiterate, it's not that it's hard for me to put this together. This piece on John. It's that there's so much to it that it's just a slow process. It's just a process that everybody's just going to have to wait until it's done. Other pieces I put together really fast, but it is a complex story. But I've been filming with John, for example, and there was one time that this guy comes in, and he was a deep, deep submarine naval guy. And he had some high up position, and he showed his credentials to John, and he drove 2 days or something just to make it there. He was in severe pain from injuries. And, I have this on film, and he comes kind of like a Mecca to go see John, comes into his office and literally breaks open in tears. I mean, the guy just needed somebody to hear his extraordinary story, somebody who wouldn't judge him and would just hear what he had to say. And then he went ahead and proved to John his credentials, and then went to tell him a really profound and extraordinary story about something he was involved with that would be interesting to John. And it was at that moment that I realized this is what John Lear has experienced for decades, is people coming to him, proving to them their military capacity or whatever, and then entrusting him with their personal story. So I think that John Lear has experienced and heard stories that you and I have not. So I think when we see him kind of spouting these things that to us just sounds insane, that to John it makes total sense because of what he's experienced. Now, I can't prove the majority of it. The majority of it I can't prove, but some of which he's told me I have been able to prove.
Well, and that's why, it's been difficult for someone like me to understand what's what and who's who in this whole thing. And that's why I think I'm so excited to see Immaculate Deception, especially given what you've told me about it. But maybe you could share with us at least an interesting UFO story that you came to find was real, that really intrigues you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's interesting for me is what I've really focused in on was obviously the Bob Lazar case. And I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but, John has kind of led me here or there to look at this case. When I started looking at this, I thought maybe all these guys are working together and lying, right? I thought maybe they've all been kind of bamboozled by, and being used from the government to spread disinfo. I was open to any theory. And I have to say, like, the first thing I asked John was, hey, can you prove to me UFOs exist? Like, put something in my hand. And he's just like, no. That's not how it works, Okay. So, for example, John told me Dr. Edgar Mitchell came out specifically to meet with Bob Lazar. We're talking about sixth man to walk on the moon. And he came out, had like this whole long meeting with Bob Lazar. Now, I mean, if I was Bob Lazar, I would have bragged about that. Back in the day, have an astronaut seek me out, and that's what started him in these whole concepts. And, I'd never heard that story. So I went out to Florida and spent 3 days with Dr. Mitchell, and sure enough, he openly went on film and talked to me about his beliefs and about why he believes these things and what role Bob Lazar played in that. So John, led me to Edgar, and Edgar confirmed it. John also led me to meet a number of people, who worked at Los Alamos or worked at Skunk Works and could verify little parts of the Lazar story, stuff that's not necessarily public, but things that hold a lot of weight for me. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's John's connections and John's ability to listen to people's stories that allow him to connect you with people like that. So that John really helped me.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm looking for partially though too, or even if it's not, it's just some of his stories, just for the listeners to understand maybe some of the intriguing stories he's shared, at least one.
Sure. Well, for example, the best image that we have, or set of images we have of Area 51, are from the dry lake bed at literally lake bed level. Okay, so these are close-up images where you have a panoramic of the dry lake bed. And I showed some of these in my presentation. John, has allowed me to digitize all of them. And these were photos that he took, I think, in the late 70s. So here's a guy. He's camped out on BLM land, out by Area 51. He drives up to where there's just a chain. I mean, that was the security at the time. There was a chain, right? And he takes a shot, a panoramic shot, a whole bunch of photos. As he sees the trucks driving over to him, he takes out the film, puts it under his ashtray, pops in another can of film, and shoots another panoramic. So by the time the cars arrive, he doesn't even let them ask. He says, oh, am I not supposed to be here? Well, I guess you want this film too. They said, yeah. So he pulls out the film from his camera and he hands it to him. Mm-hmm. But they never asked him about the film in his ashtray. Yeah. So that's how we have now these extraordinary shots, which are still to this day, the best shots of Area 51. Mm-hmm. And that's from John Lear.
Yeah. How did John Lear met Bob Lazar before, of course, he came out and everything. How did they meet?
That's a really funny story. It's almost comical, these guys and the way they're intertwined. Gene Huff is a real estate agent out in Las Vegas, and he is Bob Lazar's best friend. At the time, Bob was doing photo processing for a lot of the real estate people, so if you needed pictures processed for a house that you're selling, you go to Bob, the photo guy. So Gene actually turns out was interested in UFOs. So he kind of shook John down. John down. He says, I want your UFO files. I want copies of everything. I'm interested in this. And at the time, John was kind of leaving the UFO world, which he's done a number of times, which is also a fascinating part of his story. It became all-consuming. People were coming at him. At one time, they were truly being monitored, tracked, and surveilled. You could ask George Knapp about that. There is direct evidence. We know they were being surveilled. Some of the guys that were doing the surveillance admitted it to George Knapp. So we know they were under investigation. We know that the first question that they asked Lazar, apparently, when he went out there was, what's your association with John Lear? So essentially, you got a guy who's going to Area 51 and taking photos and exposing them. I mean, you're kind of on their list. I mean, they want to know, they want to make sure you're not going to tell too much. So there's John. He says to Gene, yeah, you can have some of my UFO files. You just have to do an appraisal of my house. Well, little did Gene know, John's house is like a compound. It's huge, right? So he brought Bob Lazar along with him. And really, it said he just came to hold the tape measure, but really what it was, I believe, is that, Gene was into this UFO stuff. Bob thought it was all BS. And so Bob, he brought Bob because he knew Bob worked at Los Alamos and was a scientist and kind of thought it was BS, so he thought it would be fun to bring him. So that's the way Gene tells the story. And he brought Bob, and he said it took John a few times of him telling, him, hey, this from Los Alamos, before John really perked up and said, "Oh, wait a second, you work at Los Alamos?" And that's how their friendship began. Was John was trying to convince Bob that UFOs were real and that the government was back engineering them out near Area 51.
So in the middle of this, then, of course, Bob Lazar had a change of heart. And from what I understand, and you would know best probably because you probably have interviewed the group on this, Bob then shared his discovery with John.
Yeah, well, I think that what happened was that, the way Bob tells it, is that he kind of felt bad for Lear because everybody had given him so much crap over this. I was just spent time with Jim Goodall, and Jim Goodall also knew Bob before Bob was Bob the UFO guy, and hung out with John because they share a love for aviation, and they would go take photos out near Groom Lake to kind of see the secret planes and all that stuff. And essentially, Jim was saying that Bob confided in him once. He goes, I really feel bad for this Lear guy. I mean, he's got the Lear name, and the poor guy believes in UFOs, I mean, yeah, from every account of people that knew Bob before Bob got his job out near Groom, Bob was a strict non-believer. He thought it was all, fabrication of human delusion. And boy, did that change.
And when it changed, wasn't it John Lear who he spoke to first?
Yeah, correct. So back to your question, I think that Bob felt that who's taken more grief, even from Bob himself, was Lear. Lear took more grief over this, than from anybody. And so I think that Bob felt he needed to tell somebody, and I think he needed a few people to know. Obviously, he told, Gene Huff, who, again, for all accounts, is his best friend. So obviously he told Gene, and I feel like he told John because he just wanted John to know he was right about something, And John, of course, knew he was right. When you tell him something he was right about, he just goes, I know. I mean, he has no shock or surprise. He's certain about his theories.
That's interesting. So then, in the middle of all this, you interviewing all of these people, you also got to know George Knapp and eventually Bob Lazar. Did you get to meet Bob Lazar prior to? Because if I'm correct, you filmed the interviews that they aired in May, or that they aired for 8 News Now, where George Knapp kind of did these anniversary interviews last year, right?
No, actually, that was 8 News that did that.
Oh, okay.
I did meet and interview Bob prior. That is the basis of the short film that I have called Lazar, where it gives a few minutes of fresh testimony from Lazar, but I think in a very different way than you've seen it before. So if you've seen that short film that I have called Lazar, and you can go to extraordinarybeliefs.com and you can go right from there and watch it. It's a 20-minute short that reminds you of the history of the Lazar story and then brings you towards the end. There's interviews, from George 25 years later, and then there's a set of statements. There's an interview from Bob. So I did those prior to that. But my whole thing is not to just like record people and throw it up on the internet, I'm trying to do something that's a little bit more sophisticated, and I'm trying to do something that's a little bit more powerful than that. So, yes, I did get to meet Bob before, and he did grant me an interview on film before, majority of which I've never put out, and it is fascinating. But I we'll see where that footage plays a role. But yeah, I got to know George as well. George has been my mentor since, for a long time now, and has really, really helped me. George has shown me where not to go. He's shown me where to go. He's really, he's a professional. I've learned so much from him, and I continue to learn from him.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So that's why it was such a great. That's why I was so excited about our Saturday afternoon lineup of you and then George Knapp, because I know George Knapp greatly respects you and your work. And then I knew you were familiar with George and Bob, and I knew you had done some interviews, and I kind of thought those 8 News Now ones, you were involved with that, but I guess not. Yours are still great, of course, so doesn't matter either way.
Yeah, no, that was George just, twisting Bob's arm saying, "Hey, Bob, it's been 25 years. Like, just give me some more statements." What I'm doing is, it's cinema. I want to work with, creating films, short films, long films, but I want them to be precise and powerful. The issue with Lazar is that for 25 years, naysayers have gone unopposed. Nobody has stood up to defend the facts of the Lazar story. George Knapp has been on this case for 25 years nonstop. When people say George Knapp, or when people say Bob Lazar is not a scientist, I mean, maybe they're not reading the same dictionaries that I'm reading of what the definition of a scientist is. Bob Lazar is a scientist. And, the other thing that kind of goes unopposed is that, these absurd statements like Bob can't answer the most fundamental of physics questions. Well, it turns out statements like that are usually third or fourth hand. They're not from direct knowledge. And I can tell you from direct knowledge that Bob can answer and does answer physics questions all the time. He's one of the brightest people that I've ever met. And in fact, I have uncovered something about Bob Lazar's history and about his employment, which I will be releasing, and it'll shake some people up.
I thought you were going to tell me right now. When are you going to be releasing this?
At an undetermined date, pretty soon. I'm kind of crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's right now. But it's interesting when you get confirmation, let's say, on someone like Bob Lazar working in a scientific capacity, wouldn't it?
Definitely. I mean, because I think it could be argued that it cannot be proven. Well, I don't know about that, though. It's just the word scientist is there's not necessarily a precise definition. I think people would argue
that's a Mirage Men tactic, to quote my good friend. That's a Mirage Men tactic. It has nothing to do with the word scientist. That argument is absolutely ridiculous. Let's get down to the facts. The question is, for example, did Bob Lazar ever work as a physicist at Los Alamos? Now, if we could verify that, wouldn't that be interesting? George Knapp has already verified that he has, been in the Los Alamos, telephone book on the front cover of the Los Alamos Monitor. They define him as a physicist. And remember, that's a little base newspaper. That's a newspaper of the Los Alamos base, and they define him as a physicist. So there's all this, all this evidence that shows, oh yeah, he did work there, and he did work there in a scientific capacity. It would be so interesting to find a coworker of his, wouldn't it?
Oh, it certainly would. And I mean, I've talked to, and it's difficult when these don't go anywhere when you don't have enough access. But I've had a friend, a good friend of mine who unfortunately passed away, who believes he worked with Bob Lazar.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a no-nonsense guy. This is one of the most honest people I've ever known in my life. Just a real honest guy. So he would have been able to prove that. And I was trying to get people connected to try to, go further with that. But unfortunately, he passed away, and everybody was too busy to kind of get that all nailed down.
Yeah, I mean, to get somebody on the record.
And to get information from Bob, because Bob is difficult to get a hold of. And even I know George has hard times getting to him sometimes.
Everybody does. I mean, so here's the funny part, right? Who is least interested in you believing the Bob Lazar story?
Yeah.
It's Bob Lazar himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he honestly, and I feel for him in this. He feels a need or a duty, or at least he feels George not pulling his arm enough, twisting his arm enough to, that he has to say something. That he has to get it off his chest, that he has to, kind of appease the gods and say, okay, here you go, guys. Let me tell you my story again. But really, he is it appears to me that he is just absolutely focused on his science. He is absolutely focused on his life as that. Bob, the UFO guy, it's done nothing good for him. And so there's probably a number of things that Bob could do to be very helpful to help prove his story. But he is wholly uninterested the majority of the time in doing so.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your point, I mean, people who want to argue he wasn't a physicist at Los Alamos, then, should do some effort, and I don't believe this has been done, to prove that that paper got it wrong, and how, and I don't think that
right.
that has happened. And like you say, George has certainly shown that he did work, I think, some pretty decent evidence that he did work at Los Alamos in some capacity. So,
if we could get that nailed down, that would be really fascinating.
It would be.
It would be, because then, the whole story changes. It's no longer like, do I believe that Bob could have worked there? It's like, I think we're really missing the point. And again, the point is very simple. Bob Lazar knew when the exact and precise time that objects would be coming up over a very remote and strange sub-area of the Nellis Air Force Range, right? And he knew this object would come up, there would be a test flight, and by the way, it was glowing orange and looked like a saucer. He knew on multiple occasions when those tests were going to happen. Every time I try to poke a hole in Bob's story, I mean, everything from Los Alamos on, in particular, I find that I can't. And that's it. That has some staying power.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the most compelling thing, I think, that video. Now, did John share that video with you?
Yeah, he sure did. John has been completely open, and I feel that John is a seeker of truth as well. He can mess with you from time to time, but I feel that he is real earnest in his desire to learn more. I mean, John says, look, I'll be the first to admit if I'm wrong on something.
Mm-hmm. And I should say, the reason I ask if John has shared that video with you, because I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but Bob had told John, go out in the desert at this time and film these things. And John, and I think Gene Huff too, right, went out to the desert, to the black box area, and they filmed those things at the time that Bob said to be there.
Well, yeah, it wasn't the black box area. It was very specifically an area where you could view over Papoose Lake, right, dry lake bed, because that's where S4 is situated, allegedly. So not only that, but Bob actually took them all out there. I mean, that's where Bob got in trouble, is, they go out there and they're basically being surveilled and don't see the people all around them. And one of them even had a gun out there. And so they got in a little bit of trouble. And that's the historic time. The last time they went out was that time where the day after Bob got taken out to what's now called Creech Air Force Base and basically shook down and threatened.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Bob, straight up, I believe Bob. And that's not just because I want to.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I guess I don't have the luxury of disbelief at this point in his story.
Well, it was fun at the Congress because we had this panel, this whistleblower panel that kind of turned into a debate, and Stanton was kind of getting it from all sides because you were debating him about Lazar. Then there was Mark Pilkington talking about Mirage Men and Rick Doty. He's a very, mellow British guy, really cool guy. But
yeah,
I was kind of jumping in there too because, of course, people on the show know that I've done some research on Doty that Stanton has and I have debated over the years. But one of the things that came out of that was you were telling Stanton, well, you haven't even interviewed him about any of this stuff. And to Stanton's, in his defense, I'm sure Bob Lazar has not shown an interest to be being interviewed.
Yeah, he has no interest in being interviewed because Stanton has essentially used, Lazar's story as a podium, in my opinion, to say and repeat, things for over a quarter century that are unfounded, fourth-hand information, and state them as fact. And so, yeah, I know that Lazar has zero interest in helping to elevate, Stanton's kind of conversation about that. I think that Stanton, unfortunately, look, I have to speak what I believe, and, he's a nice guy and all, but he said some things which are just ridiculous. And you nailed it, and so I have to say it. He has said for a quarter century that Bob Lazar cannot answer the most fundamental of physics questions. So I pushed him on it, up on stage, and asked him where did he get that impression? Did he personally have an in-depth scientific conversation with Bob Lazar where he could not answer Stanton's physics questions? And Stanton admitted, if you listen on stage, where did he hear it? It was literally third or fourth hand information. He said that there was a guy that had Lazar on a radio show, and then there was a physicist who was listening in. And Stanton said to the physicist later, hey, what'd you think of Lazar? Is he a real physicist? And then this alleged other person who apparently exists in no proof, right? Stanton says that the guy said, well, let's just say he won't have his job tomorrow, alluding to the idea that Lazar is not a physicist. It was so ridiculous. So for a quarter century, he's saying Bob can't answer basic physics questions, and he based it on that. Mm-hmm. So I can't stand there and listen for that. That just makes no sense to me.
No, in that setting, especially, with the panel, I think it was perfectly it was exactly correct of you to bring that up and to ask those questions, and you made a great point, and what you had suspected was true in that it is third and fourth hand information. And also in Stan's defense, I think we all need our work checked periodically. I don't mind when people call me out and say, hey man, you've been saying this or that, but have you checked this and this? And if I say, oops, I guess I didn't, well then I need to edit myself, and
Absolutely.
So
it makes all of us better if we can take that on the chin and turn around and, redefine how it is that we're talking about other people.
Yeah, and I hope Stanton will take it that way. I think he will because, of course, I've debated with him. We see each other often, and we're still good friends and everything.
Sure.
So he's good in that way. And, in private talks with Stanton, he's much more open to the Lazar's experiences and what he has to say than I originally had thought. He's really into it. And that's why he was really wanting to be there. And I know he would love to talk to Bob, but of course there's Bob doesn't talk to many people.
Well, and you can't go around for a quarter century, talking garbage about somebody and trying to diminish their character, calling them on your own website a fraud, and then expect them to give you the time of day. It just doesn't happen like that. You can't go around assassinating people's character, which affects maybe even their livelihood, and then expect to have a civil conversation with them or expect them to entertain having a conversation with you. And I just got to say it as I see it, man.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the way it is. We all have to be respectful, and we all have to, come at this, from a good perspective. And that's just my bottom line on it. And
I just wish that conversation would happen. I think it would be really interesting. And it's not necessarily because I think that one will prove the other wrong or vice versa. I think it'll just be interesting as an interaction that I would be so interested in seeing.
It's funny. I don't share the same passion for that conversation, and it's not because like I'm a fan of Lazar. I mean, I love what he's doing is so cool, so I'm definitely a fan of his science. But it's really because I think the conversation has been twisted. I think there's something more important going on here. I think you should just ask yourself, what if Bob Lazar is telling the truth? There's no way we're going to be able to prove it. Okay, there's most likely there's no way we're going to be able to prove his story in its entirety. So the question is, what if? What if he's telling the truth? What impact does that have? For me, the question has huge implications. If Bob Lazar's story is true, then we are being hidden from some of the most astounding physics in this universe. The laws that we know are incorrect, and there is another science out there that we are not allowed to know, and that drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, if they even really understand it completely, so I don't know. But then again, some of the stuff it seems like they're flying around out there is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of hitting on the main thing here, which is that we have a dichotomy going on. One is that there are vehicles of tangible physical origin. I mean, these are vehicles are traversing our airspace, and then I like to say with impunity, because we literally cannot do anything about it. And this has, in fact, bothered our government for decades. It has bothered every government on the planet for decades. This is a fact. This is happening. This is hardcore. There's scientific data, radar reports. This is real. And then, on the other hand, you wonder: is it that we, as a country, as a species, is it that we just don't know or have the capacity to know the truth, or is it that we do know some of the truth and we're hiding it from the people of this earth? And that's, if you believe Bob's story, that's what he's saying. He's saying, I worked on this stuff, and we do not have the capability to make it.
Right. And if that's the case, which, then I could see more why it would be a secret. Because I think that a lot of this has to do with how can we tell them anything when we don't know what we're talking about? How can we tell them, hey, we found something, we don't know what it is, we can't understand? I think that message is just too difficult to share, and so they don't. There's things flying around, but we don't know what the hell they are. Sorry, dudes. You're not as safe as you think you might be. So I don't know. I could see how that would be a hard
I'm really with you
message
on that.
To deliver.
I'm really with you on that. And as I might have mentioned to you before, that a lot of the individuals who first opened doors for me in this, separate from Lear, were from military individuals that I knew. And I guess the private standpoint that I have on this is that I have been told in no uncertain terms that what you're saying, that we have technologies, but we don't fully understand them, and we have, as Ben Rich wrote to John Andrews, UFOs, unfunded opportunities, meaning that, Skunk Works, for example, was able to develop some of their technologies based on gifts. You can call them gifts, unfunded opportunities, back engineering or gifts, right? So that is my understanding of it on a personal level from the individuals who are in my circles and my life who have told me things not to tell other people, but for my own knowledge, that it is my impression and my opinion that a lot of what we have was gifted to us, and we don't fully understand how to operate it.
Mm-hmm. So we're running out of time, but I do want to mention some of the films that are out that people can see.
Sure.
That you showed at the Congress, which are so cool. I mean, I think they're great. Nano Man is one of them, and it's speaking of enigmatic, it's very enigmatic because you kind of come into it and this guy's researching something. It takes you a while to figure out what's going on. By the time you kind of figure out what's going on and what he's saying, it's over and you're left with a lot of questions. So I was wondering if at least you can answer a couple of those questions for me, because this guy is like examining something that apparently is possibly extraterrestrial. I mean, where did this thing he's looking at come from?
I love how frustrated you are, because that means I've done my job. Because here's the deal. I am frustrated too. I am not tying together a perfect pictured movie and say, here you go. You are coming on the journey with me as an investigator in this film. So as Alejandro is saying here, you can go to extraordinarybeliefs.com, which is my website, and you can go rent right now or buy 2 films. One is called Lazar, and that's about the Bob Lazar case, and the other is called Nanoman. Now, these are short films, and there's a lot more content coming, but this is to give everybody a taste of what's to come. Now, what you saw in Nanoman, Utility Fog, which is the name of that film, this is my first interaction with Nanoman. He's a very, very intelligent scientist. He's a nanotechnologist. He's a thriving nanotechnologist. And what he did was say to me, the reason I knew what I know about nanotechnology and that things were possible as I was developing these technologies was because I have been exposed to things that I cannot define, things that I could not create, even with nanotechnology, and things that I know, in fact, we in industry cannot and will not be able to create for a long time. And he basically hands me a vial which looks like water to me. And he says, in here are billions and billions of micro machines. They appear to have interchangeable parts, and they are fabricated. And I'm going to give this to you, and you can go get it checked. And where do you want to go get it checked? It's like kind of joking, like, how about NASA? Next thing I know, he gets me into NASA Ames, and I have a free day on the scanning electron microscope, okay, with a technician. So I was trying to debunk this guy's crazy theory, and I was also just trying to replicate or to take an image and see if in fact what looked like water to me, that if in there was something that appeared to be what he was saying. Mm-hmm. All I know at this point is, when I took it in and had it analyzed, in fact there is an alloy that is on such a minute scale, and it appears to have structure that appears to be fabricated, but again, I don't know that. This is the theory of a nanotechnician. I was simply trying to replicate his images, and I was able to do so. So there is something in this liquid. It is from an alleged UFO scene, like, crop circles, abduction sites, this sort of thing. There's often an alloy, dust, that is left behind. You can read Jacques Vallée's research on this. So this is an alloy from a scene like that, allegedly. And it did kind of shock some of the people at NASA.
Weird.
Yeah, it is weird.
Well, that's pretty cool. See, and it's probably why I have a capacity to be in this field. I love enigmatic stuff. I don't mind it. Some people get so frustrated with that sort of thing, but especially with art too. I think there's a lot of enigma in that when an artist is expressing a feeling or an emotion, you can't put that all in words, and so it's hard for an artist to express it, but they can display it in a beautiful manner using a number of mediums.
Look, I'm not going to tie, just so everybody knows in advance, I'm not going to tie everything up into a pretty little package just because it suits everybody's needs with my films. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to ask questions, and I'm going to continue to break open these stories. Wherever they fall, that's what you will see. I will not fabricate. I will not make anything up. I will not make claims I cannot substantiate. What I know is that I have some mysteries going on. And if you want to go on that ride and on that journey, then check out some of the films and decide for yourself if you enjoyed watching them.
And this is something I was thinking of early on when we were talking about how you've got a lot of footage, but you want to be careful in how you put it together. You're not just going to put a bunch of stuff and send it out there.
Right.
I appreciate that because I see that as like the work of an artist, and I want to see it and live it through your eyes and through your words, because your words are a big part of your films, no doubt. Right. and a great part of them. And so I appreciate, the 10 hours of interviews is like your big rock that you're chiseling away on to create, this beautiful statue. So I really appreciate that about your film. So I'm willing to wait, even if it is, something you want to see so much. And you must get people really excited because, I have talked to people. Even before you came and talked to the Congress, I talked to a couple of people who were frustrated as hell. They're like,
yeah.
Why are you going to have Jeremy on? He keeps saying that he has all this cool stuff and he hasn't even done anything. And it's like, well, I've seen at least some snippets of stuff. What he has done, I love. I'm willing to wait. And I love these films. The other one that you did, and we don't have time to get into it, but we could talk about it at another time, and people can go online to see it, is Patient 17, where you went and essentially one of the people who Dr. Roger Lear worked with and took an implant out of, you did this kind of piece where you followed this guy and his experience. And what's wonderful is that we've never seen this before, where you follow closely with Patient 17, so you really get to understand his frustration, his hesitations, his curiosity, and even with his respect on how he views Lear or how he views other people that are related to this. I really enjoyed that, and that's another film that's up on your site.
Thank you. And the film is actually not public yet. You can't purchase that film. I need, right now I'm looking for distribution for that film. See, what people don't understand is you can make a film, but in order for people to see it, you don't just put it up on your website. It's good to get proper distribution. So that's what I'm seeking now. And, thank you for being a fan of my films, and thank you for your patience. People are completely impatient, but you know what? I have to serve no master but my own desire. Essentially, and it's not 10 hours. I have thousands of hours of footage on this subject. But the question is, what and when do I release what part and in what fashion? And that's a question only I can answer. So anyway, you guys will be the first to know when I release stuff. And I hope you enjoy it. Yeah.
And the integrity of an artist is not to rush something, but to put it together properly. And I so appreciate that, and I think that that's really important. And seems like, and I think in the trailer people could see this, Roger Lear, playing his big, what do they call those damn things at
that's a Wurlitzer organ.
Yeah, that thing's amazing.
There's only only a handful, really, in the world. You have to understand, the entire theater that this thing sits in, it is the instrument, meaning that the walls, there's separate buildings on the side of this building where everything is physically moving based on this huge generator that pumps air through the building to create these sounds. I mean, it is impressive. And this is a metaphor in the film when people get to see it, the film Patient 17. That's a metaphor that runs through the film. This is kind of like the Wizard of Oz and seeing behind the curtain when Dr. Lear passes away. It really changes things. It changes things because we don't have our wizard anymore.
Yeah, he was the alien implant wizard, like you said. So
he was.
But people can see a little bit of it because there is a minute trailer on extraordinarybeliefs.com.
Correct. And, I will be releasing that film. It will reach the public soon. And just so people know, I've already laid on you now 1 feature, 2 shorts, and tons of clips. There's a lot to go through. So if you go to the website, check it out. You won't be disappointed. You might just have to wait, but you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I love it. Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was as interesting as I thought it would be, and just like I thought as well, it's as difficult to end as I thought it would probably be because I have so many more questions and so much more to talk about. We didn't even get into Patient 17, which is a whole nother world in itself. But Thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you some more.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And again, I just want everybody to weaponize their curiosity. Start asking questions, do the research, look at the material, and thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much to Jeremy for being on the show. Really interesting fella, and I know he has a lot more to say, and I have a lot more I want to talk to him about because as we alluded to, I mean, barely even touched on the Patient 17 stuff, and there's a lot of great stuff there in his investigation and getting to know that person. But he's got a lot of other stuff he's working on that I'm aware of that looks really interesting. So he even says in the future, the next show that we do, he'll be willing to share some audio that no one has ever heard before. Like one of his interviews, there's some really interesting stuff that he's gotten, and we'll be able to share that on the air with you next time we have him on. So it won't be too long. Keep an eye out, and we'll have we'll have Jeremy back. Jason will definitely have back next week. So thanks to Jason for joining us for the news, and thank you all for listening. Don't forget to check out Spacing Out. We have those coming out most Fridays, including last Friday. So we have a new Spacing Out. We'll have one coming up this Friday. But April and May, we actually have a lot of vacations going on around here and various things. So we've got there's I think a couple conference things kind of going on and trips. So we'll have you're in hit and miss when it comes to Spacing Out, mostly hit, but just so you're aware that we may or may not have shows, and that'll go the same for the podcast. So we'll have another one next week. However, I can't remember what I'm up to when. So I know I'm going on a cruise in May. There'll be no show then. But we may, in April, may miss a show here or there, just so you're aware. So don't flip out on me. I gave you prior warning, people. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. You can go to our radio page to see the Clerk Chronicles, which is where he hosts his music for free. It's great music. For Jeremy Corbell, to see more about him, go to extraordinarybeliefs.com. To see more about the news that we talked about earlier in the show, go to openminds.tv. Also at openminds.tv, in the upper right, you'll see the link to the video portal. You'll actually see it in our tabs and in other places. But at our video portal, we now have the Bob Lazar video up there. We're going to have George Knapp's talk about Bob Lazar there too. So it's just a few dollars to watch those videos or to subscribe, and then you get to watch. We've got tons of videos up there you guys could watch if you subscribe. It's just a few dollars, and we have more videos